In a distant future, at some point in the 22nd century, in a clearly post-apocalyptic world, a man was preparing for another mission, while in the distance, a poor guy ran desperately asking for help. He was soon surrounded by creatures far more powerful than him, and begged for mercy, just like all humans in that world did deep down. Everyone thought the same thing, that whoever destroyed the planet needed to be punished. That was when a white-haired man jumped from a fighter jet at high speed and descended, already eliminating one of the monsters on impact. He apologized for the delay, and the victim thanked him repeatedly, believing that they could finally recover the world. The man confirmed that yes, everything would be fine, and that he could rest now. The boy was gravely injured and ended up dying right there. Soon after, another man approached and commented that they had probably arrived too late, and that boy was likely the last survivor on the planet. He told Jin to give up and face reality, because humanity had come to an end. The mutant monsters had been born from the constant pollution of the environment. They were corrupted living beings with absurd regeneration powers, and they could not be eliminated even with nuclear bombs. Even so, they did not give up and carried out countless experiments until they finally found a way to fight back. However, Kagura stated that there was no one left to save, because they had arrived too late. Even so, Jin replied that there was still something worth saving. Kagura asked if he believed there were still survivors, and Jin explained that not now, but maybe in the future. He remembered the nanomachines he had created, and questioned whether they also restored the environment. Kagura confirmed that yes, because they not only nullified the monster's regeneration, but also slowly began restoring the planet. Jin then stated that one day that world would return to its former beauty, and that at that moment a new civilization could thrive. Kagura considered that an impossible utopia, but Jin said that for him that small probability was already enough. Later, while Jin was recovering, both he and Kagura thought that their powers might be needed in the future. Keeping that possibility alive already made everything worthwhile, so Jin was placed in a cryopreservation capsule, and the years passed. The monsters slowly died, the world regained its colors, animals began to reappear, and after 100 million years, the thawing process was initiated. On that same planet, now transformed, a group of beastmen ran from a gigantic creature that tried to capture them. They questioned whether it was really safe to be in that place, but the young woman leading them insisted that it was, because she believed the guardian deity was there. When they opened the doors of an ancient temple, they realized there was no escape. The creature had difficulty passing through the entrance, but forced its way in, and managed to reach them. Suddenly, something broke free from a capsule at the back of the room, and like lightning, blew the monster's head apart. It was Jin, who stated that it was worth believing in the future. He confirmed that the storage left by Kagura worked perfectly, as the artifacts, equipment, and clothes were intact even after 100 million years. Much of the computer data had been corrupted, but it was impressive that the place had survived, probably thanks to the nanomachines released into the atmosphere. Now he wanted to understand what had happened to the world. The only thing he could rely on was the message cube left by Kagura. He then turned to the small group and asked who they were, only at that moment realizing that he was completely naked. He apologized, saying that he had been like that for 100 million years, and had gotten used to it, then put his usual clothes back on. When leaving the temple, which was actually a bunker, Jin was blinded by the sunlight, since he had not seen brightness for 100 million years, and was amazed by the landscape of that new world. One of the young women asked him to follow them. Jin noticed that they had animal ears, and concluded that they were not human. Humanity had been extinguished, and another species had evolved during that time, strangely similar to humans, probably influenced by the nanomachines. The fact that they still shared a common language was a good sign. He then introduced himself as Shido Jin, saying they could just call him Jin. The girl introduced herself as Hakama. The big one who looked like a koala was Danpu, and the timid boy with cat ears was Shandy. After that, Jin asked where they were taking him, and what exactly they wanted him to do. Hakama said they were almost there, and that they needed him to defeat the corruptors. Jin asked if they still existed, and when they returned to the village, they found everything in flames. Shandy ran off desperately to look for his family, while Jin observed the place carefully. There were wooden fences, simple stone and wood constructions, nothing very advanced. It became clear to him that he had awakened right at the beginning of a new civilization. In the middle of the chaos, the villagers were fighting against a massive creature. A woman asked why Hakama had come back, and Jin carefully analyzed the monster, concluding that it seemed to be the type of corrupted that existed now. It was very similar to the ones he had faced in the past. Hakama told her grandmother that she would not run away, and began to gather energy within her own body, which impressed Jin. He decided to test something, rushed forward and delivered a powerful kick to the corrupted head, saving the old woman and letting Hakama finish it. The girl focused her energy and fired a fireball that defeated the creature. Jin thought that, as expected, the suppression of regeneration caused by the nanomachines was working. The corrupted could no longer heal easily, not even after a relatively weak attack. The nanomachines spread through the atmosphere must have affected many of them. Even so, he knew that only compatible humans could control them. He asked the old woman if everyone in that era could use that power, and she explained that no, only a few, those who possessed the so-called divine power. In that village there were only 4, including Hakama. Hakama asked where the others were, and her grandmother replied that they had already been evacuated. However, the bigger problem was that they had returned to a place that was practically destroyed. The corrupted they had defeated was only a newly born offspring. The main body was something far more dangerous, and soon more corrupted larvae would invade the village. Other warriors appeared to help. A spearman declared that he himself would kill the creature. The old woman asked about the villagers, and he assured her that he had taken them to a shelter. Next to the spearman was Hakama father, who asked worriedly where she had gone. She replied that she had gone to the sealed door. The grandmother explained that that place was forbidden, but Hakama reminded her that she herself used to say that behind that door was the guardian deity, who would help when danger arrived. The old woman then wondered if the man who came out of that place was that deity, since he did not look divine at all. The spearman mocked, asking if that inferior species was supposed to be the guardian deity. Jin reacted to the comment, and Shandy warned his brother to be careful, stating that he really had defeated a corrupted. The spearman named Sarlis scoffed, saying it must have been just an insignificant larva. He stated that this was the village problem, and that intruders were not welcome. He told Jin not to interfere in their matters. Hakama father asked Sarlis where he was going, and he replied that he was going to kill the giant corrupted because that was what he did. The old woman called him reckless, and said they should evacuate. She approached Jin and thanked him for the help, saying she did not know who he was, but that if he was willing, he could take the children and her son to a shelter while she tried to help Sarlis, even at the risk of her life. Jin, however, refused. He had his own pride and would not accept being called an inferior species, and then simply run away. Sarlis charged at the creature without fear, declaring that he would carry that country on his back and become a holy knight. He said that an invading monster would not survive there. At the first attack from the spearman, the creature reacted by summoning several larvae, but Sarlis managed to defeat them easily. He then struck a direct blow to the monster face, which screamed in pain, but soon the wound closed within a few seconds, fully regenerating. The creature launched a claw attack that would have hit Sarlis directly, but Jin appeared with his shield and blocked the blow, asking if he was alright. More offspring appeared and caught Sarlis off guard, but with a simple snap of Jin fingers, 2 piercing strikes went through the smaller creatures, killing them instantly. The villagers were shocked by what they saw. With just one hand, Jin blocked a massive attack from the creature, although he admitted it was starting to get heavy. He told everyone to fall back for now, and pulled Sarlis away from the next attack. He explained that simply attacking was not enough because the creature would regenerate immediately. To prevent that, nano-machines that inhibited regeneration were necessary, what they called divine power. He acknowledged that Sarlis' spear strike had been good, but not deep enough to stop that creature from healing. Sarlis asked if he really was the guardian deity, and Jin replied that he did not remember becoming a deity. Even so, there was something he wanted to make clear. He asked if that was the village problem, and Sarlis confirmed that it was, saying that he himself would solve it. Jin then corrected him, saying no, that it was his problem. The creature tried to attack Jin with its tentacles, but he dodged every strike while thinking that he first needed to immobilize it. Using nanomachines, he crystallized the tentacles in midair, as if turning them into solid water. Jin declared that those monsters had been born because of his generation, and that since he had been there for 100 million years, it was his responsibility to put an end to it once and for all. Sarlis asked how he intended to do that, and Jin explained that he was the result of countless repetitions of brutal and tragic humanity, of a history stained with blood. He was the last human ever created. Then he fired a beam of plasma, combined with nanomachines that completely disintegrated the creature body in a single flash of light. Most people were terrified by what they saw, but Hakama watched in admiration. The beam pierced the sky, cut through the clouds, and lit up the entire day. Jin then stated that besides being the last human, he was also the ultimate weapon of humanity. Meanwhile, someone was watching everything from afar. That person had gone to investigate the new corrupted that appeared near Kodama village, but ended up finding something far more impressive. They thought that not even the captain of the Holy Knights would be capable of something like that, and decided to return immediately to the royal captain to report what had happened. At night, Jin analyzed the message cube left by Kagura. The recording began by saying that if he was hearing that message, it meant Kagura was no longer in that world. He commented that he had always wanted to say that line, and wondered what the future would be like, imagining that the environment must have improved exponentially. However, he got straight to the point, and warned about a problem. Even with the environmental recovery, the corrupted would probably not disappear. Kagura explained that, about 1,000 years after entering cryopreservation, he began to notice that something was wrong with the water. He would enter and leave his sleep to observe the changes in the world. As the environment recovered, the number of corrupted did decrease, but he noticed an even greater threat. The corrupted were evolving along with the environment. He did not know exactly how, but he was certain they would become an even more dangerous threat. All he could do was help newly born life forms develop ways to fight the corrupted, as well as leave some prepared energy for Jin. When checking his pockets, Jin found an injection of nanomachines. When he used it, he went through bodily modifications. Kagura explained that that power could only be used by him, since he was 100% compatible with nanomachines. After all, he had been created from them. With that ability, Jin was able to materialize a knife from the palm of his hand, generating objects through the manipulation of nanomachines. It was an extremely useful power. Kagura also revealed that he had spread other equipment and upgrades across research laboratories around the world, dividing everything as a precaution, so they would not be destroyed all at once. He wanted Jin to travel and explore the new world, even without knowing what kind of threat the corrupted would become. He was certain that this world was much better than the old one. The message then showed Kagura true appearance, already much much older. He said he would not be able to accompany Jin until the end, and that he was leaving the world in his hands. Jin replied that he understood. At that moment, Hakama called out to him, and Danpu commented that everyone was looking for him, since they could not start without the star of the show. Suddenly, Jin realized that Hakama necklace was actually an access key to a laboratory. He asked where she had gotten that pendant, and she explained that a long time ago, a great person had entrusted it to her clan. It was an amulet passed down from generation to generation, and they said that as long as they possessed it, the guardian deity would protect them. Jin then understood that this was how she had managed to open the laboratory, and thought that he owed a lot to the people of that village. Later, the village gathered around a bonfire, celebrating, drinking and eating after the battle. When Jin, the so-called guardian deity, appeared, some began whispering that it had to be a joke, because he looked like just an inferior species. One of the men asked if that skinny guy had really defeated the monster. That was when Sarlis showed up and scolded them, saying that since they had run away from the fight, they would never know what really happened, and that they were a bunch of fools. He firmly stated that Jin really was the guardian deity, and that he was incredible. The children found it funny how he suddenly changed his attitude. The elder once again thanked him on behalf of the village, and Hakama father said that if it were not for him, the village would have disappeared from the map, so they were in his debt. Jin replied that he did not need any payment, but if they insisted, he only wanted information. He needed to know everything about that world. The elder then explained that the best place for that was the royal capital, called Kermosia, where the king who ruled the country lived. People from all regions gathered there, so there would certainly be information about the state of the world. The people of Kodama village also visited the capital to sell special products made from silkworm threads. The journey was long and dangerous, but she believed the guardian deity would be fine. Jin admitted that he did not even know where the capital was, and the elder suggested that Hakama should be his guide, since she also had matters to resolve there. She explained that Hakama possessed divine power, and that in the royal capital, there was an academy to develop that kind of ability. They had postponed taking her because of the recent invasion, but they wanted her to enroll. That way they could travel together. Jin found it interesting that schools and academies already existed in that era. At that moment, Sarlis appeared, saying that he was the most suitable to guide the guardian deity. The elder replied that he had no business in the capital. He argued back, saying that he would join the Order of the Holy Knights, but she reminded him that anyone who did not attend the academy could not become a knight. He protested indignantly, and Jin commented that divine power was not for just anyone, so maybe he had potential. Hakama explained that there was a written exam, and that Sarlis had failed. Jin found that reasonable, but became curious about the term Holy Knight. Meanwhile, the girl who had been watching everything returned to inform a knight that the monster from Kodama village had been defeated. She explained that she was on her way to report the incident to the guildmaster. The knight found it strange, as he believed that only a holy knight could defeat that creature, so he decided to investigate personally. When he heard that the monster was already dead, he was surprised. The messenger commented that coincidences really do happen, but did not notice one of the creature offspring behind her. The knight then split the monster in half with a single sword strike, and said that if the story was true, that would be interesting. He was also curious to know who had defeated the great monster. Later, Jin woke up in the cabin where he had spent the night, and took a moment to appreciate the scenery. The air was clean and pleasant. He thought that he had never imagined seeing such a beautiful world again, and wished that Kagura could have seen it. Shandy appeared and politely asked that, as the guardian deity, he should at least put on clothes before going outside. After some time, Jin was ready to leave. The elder asked Hakama to fulfill her role as a guide properly. Sarlis was clearly dissatisfied, thinking that he could learn a lot by staying close to the guardian deity, but the elder insisted that he needed to study first. Jin told Sarlis that his movements were not bad, and that he would wait for him in the capital. The young man replied excitedly that he would work hard. Hakama father asked them to take good care of her and to be careful on the journey. As they departed, Jin was able to admire the different landscapes along the way. The journey was long, with breathtaking sunsets and varied biomes. At night, at the campsite, he asked how long it would take to reach the capital, and Hakama replied that it would take about 4 days of walking. She also asked why he was so interested in learning about the world. Jin replied that it was a secret. He already knew that the corrupted had not disappeared, but in theory they should only survive in highly polluted environments. However, the lake where they fought the creature was clean, and unlike what he expected. Hakama asked why he seemed so worried, saying that he had a frightening expression. Jin replied that it was nothing, just a distant thought, but reflected that, fortunately, the world had not yet been completely dominated by the corrupted. First, Jin needed to understand how people of that era dealt with the corrupted, so he decided to investigate little by little. While he and Hakama were having dinner near the campfire, that same knight appeared and apologized for interrupting their rest, but said he needed to talk. Jin asked who he was, and the man introduced himself as Argus Walton, captain of the 7th Division of the Holy Knights. When Jin repeated the name of the order in a curious tone, a female knight beside him reacted indignantly, saying that he should at least stand when speaking to the captain. Argus told her to stop, and apologized for his subordinate rudeness, explaining that he only wanted to talk. Jin asked if they already knew who he was, and if they had been looking for him. Argus replied that his subordinate had been rude, but yes, they wanted to ask a few questions, such as where they came from and where they were going. Hakama replied that they came from Kodama village, and were heading to the royal capital. The female knight named Karina stated that as she had expected, it was indeed them, but pointed out that there was no birth record of inferior species in Kodama, implying that Jin was in trouble. Jin found it curious that there were birth records, realizing that the country was quite organized for that era. Argus commented that the clothes Hakama was wearing were special products from Kodama village, rare fabrics sold in the royal capital for high prices and usually made to order for children, rarely appearing on the market. That confirmed that they really came from there. However, he pointed out that Jin was wearing unfamiliar clothing. He also mentioned that on the road between Kodama and the capital, there had been incidents involving bandits who used children to lure victims, exactly like the situation could appear at that moment. Hakama defended Jin, saying that he was not like that, but Argus stated that he would make that judgment himself. When Hakama tried to invoke her divine power to protect Jin, she was immediately restrained by Argus' spiritual pressure, which surrounded her before she could act. He commented that she was a promising child with great divine power. Jin then realized that the holy knights were truly strong. Argus asked where he came from, foreigner, and warned that depending on the answer he could arrest him right there. Jin stared at him for a few seconds, sighed, and said that he also came from Kodama village. Karina called that a lie, but Argus sheathed his sword and said he understood. He asked Hakama if she was lying, and she replied that that man was the guardian deity of Kodama village. Argus turned around, and Jin asked if it was already over. The captain replied that yes, that it was part of the job, and apologized for the rudeness. Karina questioned whether he would really let them go just like that, but Argus said that since they were heading to the capital, they would meet again. If they got into trouble, they could look for him, as he would like to make it up to them. After they left, Karina asked why the captain had backed down, stating that that man was suspicious and an inferior species. Argus reflected out loud about who was really inferior in that situation. Another knight admitted that she had also felt the difference in strength. The moment she raised her sword against Jin, she tried to act, but was restrained before she could even move. She could not activate her own divine power. She tried to summon the spirits, but they simply did not respond. The other knight confirmed that the same thing had happened to her. Argus explained that this meant there was a huge gap between their power and Jin power. Even within the order of the knights, only the Grand Master might be on the same level. Karina said she had not noticed that, and Argus replied that she was still new to the squad and that it was understandable. Regarding the corrupted incident in Kodama village, Argus concluded that it was probably Jin who had defeated the creature. Karina questioned whether they would leave such a dangerous man free, but he replied that he did not know his identity, yet he did not seem like someone dangerous. Even so, he would remain alert. They needed to return to the capital, as they could not be absent for long, even if the corrupted problem had been resolved quickly. He would also make a request to the guild to deal with the bandits on the road. Deep down, he kept thinking about the guardian deity of Kodama, imagining that if he became an ally, he could be of great help against the major problems of the country. The next morning, as they resumed their journey, Jin commented that the situation from the previous night had been interesting, and asked if all holy knights were as strong as Argus. Hakama replied that he was special. Among the knights, the chosen ones received the title of paladins, and Argus was certainly one of them. The activation of his spiritual arts was on a completely different level. Jin became curious and wanted a better explanation about that. Hakama explained that the power borrowed from the strength of spirits is called divine power, and that the techniques developed through that power are called spiritual arts. Jin began to think that nanomachines were treated as spirits in that era, and that science had basically turned into fantasy. He understood the logic behind it. Then he remembered the racism he had suffered from Karina, and asked why they called him an inferior species, since it seemed that there was more than one species in that era. Hakama confirmed that yes, there were. Some resembled fish, others insects. According to what her grandmother used to tell her, a long time ago habitable places were limited, so 10 groups of people had to adapt to the new reality in different habitats and biomes in order to survive in the environments where they lived. Jin wondered if that meant there had been survivors from 100 million years ago, and that those humans had evolved in different ways, but he thought it was better not to get stuck on that right now, so he asked if those who failed to adapt were called inferior species. Hakama replied that yes, because they struggled in many situations compared to those who adapted, and most of them ended up being sold as slaves. Jin thought that era was truly backward, since slavery still existed. Hakama commented that even so, it was not that different from what had existed before, because discriminating against someone just for being a little different still felt strange to her. Jin realized that she was a good person and thought she should stay that way. In the middle of the road, suddenly, they saw a girl collapse from exhaustion right in front of them. She fainted at Jin's feet, and he realized she was human like him, and covered in wounds. Hakama ran to help her, and Jin said he would treat her, but the girl suddenly woke up and ordered them not to move, pulling out a knife and placing it against Hakama's neck, warning that if they did anything against her, she would kill the girl. Jin immediately realized they had fallen into a trap, which meant there were other people nearby. He had already noticed a man approaching with a stealth ability. The man praised the girl for a job well done, saying she had done exactly as instructed. Jin realized the man was using camouflage based on the nanomachines around him, adjusting his appearance to the environment and becoming almost invisible, since the effect only broke when he moved, and that man used the technique very well. The bandit leader mocked him, saying Jin wore clothes that were far too nice for an inferior species, and asked what country he was from, while telling him not to move, since a sword was already pressed against his neck. Hakama tried to use her divine power, but Jin stopped her, saying that power was not meant to be used against people. She understood. The leader said it was better to listen to the boy, but became interested when he noticed the girl had a lot of divine power. One of the bandits asked if he could use it too, but before he got an answer, he was kicked hard in the stomach and fell to the ground. The leader told him to be careful with the merchandise, saying that did not change the price of inferior ones. Hakama realized those were the criminals the knight from the previous night had mentioned, the slave traders. The leader then said he would put the girl to sleep for a moment and approached using an electric ability. Later Hakama woke up facing Jin, who was only wearing underwear. He asked if she was alright, and she said she was not hurt, but wanted to know where they were. They were inside a cage, surrounded by several other cages full of slaves. Jin explained that they were in the hideout of the people who attacked them, and that many others had also been captured and taken there. Hakama asked why he was the only one without clothes, and he explained that they had taken his clothes to sell because they were nice, and seemed rare, and at least they had left him his underwear. She commented that he was too calm for that situation, and he replied that he had spent a large part of his life without clothes. She made it clear she was not talking about that, but about the fact that they were enslaved, and asked why he had not fought since he could have easily defeated them all. At that moment, one of the beastmen brought the beaten little girl to give them food. Hakama said he only fell into that trap because of her, but the girl replied that she had never asked forgiveness from anyone. Jin realized she was actually kind, because real villains would not even bother talking, so he decided it was time to act. With his bare hands he crushed the bars of the cage and made space to get out. Then he told the little girl he had been waiting for her, and asked where they were keeping the hostage so they could save her. She was surprised and asked how he knew that, and he said it was just a guess. First, using nanomachines, Jin healed all of the girl's wounds, and made it clear that not even villains usually beat their own companions like that, so it was obvious she was not truly part of the group, just another slave. She had spent all that time following orders, and it had been obvious from the start. The girl became nervous, but ended up confessing that her younger brother had been taken by them, and that she only obeyed to make sure he stayed safe. They had said that if she disobeyed, the two of them would be separated forever. Her parents had also been killed by those same men, but she kept obeying to protect the only family she had left. Jin thought those guys were nothing but scum. Hakama asked if he had allowed himself to be captured on purpose just to save her, and he confirmed it was part of the plan. He explained that villains are stubborn and persistent like grease stains that never fully disappear. If you let one escape, it comes back to cause more trouble. That was why he had come to their base, to get rid of all of them at once. He climbed the stairs, broke down the door, and already knocked one of the bandits down on impact, determined to cut the evil at the root. For him, that was how villains were eliminated. Jin himself understood villains better than anyone. 100 million years ago in his modern society, he was just a street kid. For him, the concept of justice practically did not exist. But over time, he realized that in a world where justice had to be enforced all the time, it was because that world was full of trash. He was wanted for reasons that did not even make sense to him. All he wanted was to live a normal life. Nothing would have been better than that, but the environment he grew up in never allowed it, so he had to fight. Not even the criminals sent to kill him could accomplish the task, and he spent his life crushing everyone who tried to take him down. Until one day someone reached out and said that he had simply been born in the wrong time, or maybe in the wrong world. That person was Dr. Kagura. After taking down the first guard in that base, Jin even made a point of dragging the body through the corridors, using it as a distraction to reach the next ones and take down everyone along the way. When he reached the main room, he threw punches at the armed and armored guards, who did not even have time to defend themselves. Down below, the slaves could only hear the screams of pain echoing through the place. The human girl asked who exactly her partner was, and Hakama replied that he was practically a deity and that anyone would be safe by his side. She said that everyone should escape now, exactly as Jin had instructed. Even so, the girl still wondered if they would really be saved. If that powerful man showed up, he had a lot of divine power, and she did not believe Jin could defeat him alone. But while she was thinking about it, Jin was already storming the leader's office, forcing his way in. The bandit boss asked what he wanted, if he was there to buy slaves as well, saying he could choose whoever he wanted. Jin finished dealing with the lesser thugs and asked if the leader was done talking. The slave leader began to wonder what kind of person that was, and what power he was using. Jin commented that it was almost a relief to see that he was just a mediocre villain, because real villains would have run away a long time ago. He was the type who underestimates the enemy, thinks he will always win, and only when he is about to lose starts offering everything he has to escape. Even so, the leader still had one last card to play. He ran to a lever and opened the passage to a cage, where he kept a corrupted creature locked up, saying he had obtained that specimen precisely to deal with anyone who tried to interfere with his plans, and that the creature would tear Jin apart. The corrupted creature, extremely muscular, charged forward with everything it had, but Jin blocked the attack with his bare hands. He replied that he was born with a superhuman constitution, and that according to the doctor he had far more muscle fibers than a normal human, so against a corrupted creature like that, he would not hesitate. Using his divine power, he disintegrated the creature right there. The slave leader was in shock, and wondered if he also used divine power. Jin replied that now it was time to deal with the last villain. The man tried to beg to be let go, but Jin made it clear that was not an option. Then he beat the slave trader until he could no longer resist. After getting his clothes back, which for him was a very important part of the job, Jin returned to the imprisoned children and apologized for taking so long. He said he would free everyone from that place, but before that, he decided to take a look at the documents in the office, because it would not make sense to leave without some evidence. He opened one of the drawers and found a very suspicious document. He tried to read it, but had no idea what was written. It was another language, so he thought that later he would ask Hakama for help to learn how to read and write in that language. Even so, Jin kept thinking about what those people were planning. By capturing a corrupted creature. That did not make sense if it was only to keep slaves under control, so he used his nanomachines to analyze the creature. With that power, he could see all kinds of things, even traces of a material's past. As he deepened the analysis, he ended up seeing memories of the slave leader talking to someone above him. In the vision, the leader asked what they intended to do with the corrupted creature after capturing it, and the other man replied that it was none of his business, but let slip that something very interesting would soon happen in that country. Jin realized that it was part of a much bigger plan than simply selling slaves. Later, guards arrived to deal with the situation. They took the slaves to a safe place and arrested the slave mercenaries. The girl who had been helped by Jin found her younger brother, who was being held in the leader's office. She thanked him a lot, calling Jin a deity, but he replied that it was nothing like that, and that she did not need to worry about that kind of thing. Then he asked Hakama if those guards were affiliated with the territory. She explained that they were not, that they belonged to the guild, and pointed to a man with ram horns wearing a suit, saying that he was the leader. The man approached Jin and introduced himself as Padrek, the leader of that guild, thanking him for his cooperation. He was impressed to see that Jin did not even have a scratch after facing so many criminals alone. Even being from an inferior species, he seemed extremely powerful. Padrek commented that it was not the first time they had arrested people like that, and that cases like those were happening in several places across the country. Jin asked if the lord of that territory had no interest in capturing the criminals. Padrek laughed and said that the lord did not have that kind of authority there. The ones who dealt with crimes were the guilds, which had sworn loyalty to the king. Even if the lord himself committed a crime, they would have to arrest him. Adapting that to the world he came from, Jin thought it was like the lord was the mayor and the guild was the police. Even so, he remembered the figure he had seen in the visions, so he handed over the evidence he had found in the office to Padrek, saying that it could help capture others involved. He also asked if the name of the local lord appeared in the documents. Padrek replied that his earlier comment had just been a joke, and that the lord's name was obviously not there. Jin thought that someone had removed any compromising connection. No one could prove that the lord was involved. Maybe only he himself knew the truth. After that, Jin asked what would happen to the rescued slaves. Padrek explained that the guild would take responsibility for escorting them, investigating their backgrounds and identities, and trying to take them back to where they lived, but if they had nowhere to return to, there would not be much they could do. Jin knew that those two siblings had lost their parents, and had nowhere to go, so he asked if there was any shelter in the region. Padrek replied that there was not. They could even try to help them find jobs, but they were too young, and because they were from an inferior species, not everyone would be willing to hire them. Jin thought that even there, that kind of prejudice existed. He really wanted to help the children, so he had an idea and asked if there was a place for them to work, they would accept it. The girl immediately said yes, and asked if he had something in mind. He said that he did, and remembered Argus, the knight. He knew a place that could be perfect for them. Meanwhile, Argus was returning to the capital when he felt a chill, as if someone had mentioned him. He praised everyone for their work on the expedition, and dismissed them. Upon arriving at his residence, he was received by servants, attendants, and butlers. He asked the head butler if everything was alright, since he noticed that the atmosphere seemed tense. The butler said he did not want to bother him, since he must be tired, but whispered a report in his ear. Argus thanked him for the information and realized that the situation was more serious than he had imagined. Corrupted monsters were appearing in the capital in broad daylight. He did not know where they were coming from, but he was sure that someone was influencing it from behind the scenes. For him, the most suspicious place was the one that did not affiliate with anyone, the Harnisk Academy. He needed an ally to deal with that, and he needed one quickly. 3 days after resolving the slave traders case, Jin, Hakama, and the two siblings continued their journey. The girl asked if there really was some kind of work she could do in the capital. Jin replied that she could read, write, and had basic knowledge of mathematics, so they would definitely find something. Hakama asked him to look ahead. There it was, the royal capital. Jin was impressed by the sight. It was a massive place. At the end of the day, after sunset, they noticed that the city was still extremely lively. There were people everywhere, moving non-stop even at that hour. Hakama explained that almost all the products there were imported, so you could find everything in the capital, including Kodama clothes that were also sold there. Jin found that very interesting. He saw all kinds of human-derived races walking through the streets, all gathered as if it were a large harmonious civilization, each with their own unique way of developing. The streets were clean, the children seemed happy, and public safety gave the impression of working well, but he knew that every era had its own problems. In one corner, he saw slaves being led away, and that bothered him. He asked Hakama when the entrance test for the academy would take place. She replied that it would happen in 1 week, so he commented that he still had time and could get to know the city better first. A blonde girl who overheard the conversation was surprised, thinking that a child, and on top of that, someone from an inferior species, intended to enter the Harnisk Academy. Later, already at the inn, the children threw themselves onto the bed full of excitement. Jin commented that he could finally sleep properly in a comfortable place. He thought that he had achieved his first goal, which was reaching the capital. Now he needed to start his investigation. He just did not know where to begin. In any case, he needed more money if he wanted to live there. He had received a generous reward for defeating the slave traders, but he knew it would not last forever. He also needed to find a job for the two siblings. The fastest way would be to meet that knight again, Argus, but without connections, nothing would be simple. The first part of the investigation would be about the corrupted. Someone was trying to control those creatures for malicious purposes. The corrupted were dangerous, and no one truly knew how to control them. He could not allow allow the past to repeat itself. So he asked Hakama how people learned things in that world. She explained that they usually hired teachers or studied through books, but books were expensive. In Kodama they shared them because they did not have many. But in the capital there was a large library. Jin found that extremely convenient. Maybe there he would find evidence that could help him locate Kagura's laboratory. But when they arrived at the library, the person in charge informed them that unfortunately they could not use the books. They were considered tools of the kingdom, and not just anyone had access. Only students with recognized abilities by the academy or college, as well as nobles living in the capital, could use them. Hakama also commented that Jin did not even know how to read properly. He thought she was trying to teach him some letters, but he knew that learning that way would be too slow. He wanted to learn directly from a book. Suddenly, some hooded men approached, and it became clear that they were the target. The first one did not hesitate, and rushed at Jin with a punch, which was easily blocked. Jin asked if that was a common type of greeting in the capital, since he thought public safety there was good. When the attacker tried to activate his divine power, Jin redirected the trajectory of his hand, and the power exploded in the air. The man admitted that he had good instincts, while others around wondered who those people were using divine power in the middle of the street. Jin asked what the purpose of that was. The first one replied that the contractor was annoyed with him. Simple as that. Jin understood that someone had sent those men after him, and commented that it worked for him as well. One of the beast men said that all he had to do was leave the capital, to avoid facing that kind of danger every day. Jin replied that he would think about it, since it really did seem dangerous. But in the next instant he dodged another punch and threw the attacker to the ground, knocking him unconscious. The companion tried to launch a fire sphere at him, but Jin turned the attack into smoke and grabbed the criminal by the collar, saying that if they were the danger they needed to improve a lot. At least they had the courage to face him. The attacker was confused, asking if he was not from an inferior species. Before the situation escalated, a female knight approached, ordering everyone not to move. The commotion was over. It was Karina, who commented that she just wanted to enjoy her day, but those idiots had decided to cause trouble in the middle of the street. She declared that everyone would be taken to prison. Karina then realized that Jin was there in the middle of the situation. He replied that it was the best possible scenario. She commented that he was that inferior species from before, and that he seemed to have too much courage for someone like that, especially causing a scene in the middle of the capital. She said it had to be an inferior species to act without knowing what they were doing. At that moment, a woman who had witnessed everything approached, and explained that in fact he was just defending himself, because those two men had attacked him first. Karina looked at the attackers, noticed their uniforms, and asked if they were from the Harness Academy. She already seemed to suspect something, and made it clear that she hoped it was not the involvement of a young lady again. She told the guild members to take the two away under arrest. Jin asked what young lady meant, but Karina replied that it was not his problem, and that he did not need to worry about it. He then asked if knights also patrolled, because he thought that was the guild's job. Karina explained that the capital was very vast, and that some people were too strong, so the knights also needed to maintain public order. She thought to herself that she had only been looking for a place to eat when that situation happened, but admitted that that guy was really very strong because students of the academy were not just anyone. Before leaving, she told Jin that she was heading out, and that he should not cause any more trouble. He then asked for a favor, if it was not too much trouble. Later, he was already at Argus's residence, asking him to hire the two children. Argus commented that he had told him to look for him if he had any problems, and asked if his numbers had not increased since the last time. Jin explained that he had ended up being captured by slave bandits, and that he rescued those two children. Argus wanted to know what kind of bandits they were, and Jin replied that the guild had dealt with them. Argus was surprised as he realized that Jin had probably faced them all alone, and asked who those children were. Jin explained that they had no family, and that it was difficult for them to find work, because they were from an inferior species. He said he wanted to at least try to help them because they already suffered enough prejudice. Argus replied that he had no obligation to help those children. Jin explained that it was simply the way he dealt with things. Regardless of what had happened, he had saved them and would take responsibility until the end. Argus then agreed to hire them as servants in his house, but imposed one condition. He wanted Jin to work as an instructor. Later, the two children were already wearing new uniforms. Jin commented that they even looked quite fancy. The girl thanked Argus a lot, calling him Lord, but he replied that they did not need to thank him, because they would also be working there. He instructed the butler and the head maid to train them properly, and made it clear that he would not tolerate discrimination or prejudice for them being from an inferior species. While walking through the corridors, Jin asked if there was another reason for him to become an instructor. Argus replied that he had good perception. He did not know his story, but he knew he was a good person and extremely powerful. He wanted him to infiltrate as an instructor at the Harness Academy. He explained that the political situation in the country was terrible. Several factions were competing for supremacy. The king was sick and did not have much time left to live, so the struggle for succession had already begun. The problem was that it was not only political leaders acting in the shadows, but also criminals, who were using corrupted creatures and dragging innocent people into that ridiculous conflict. Jin thought that the territorial lord he had seen in the memories was not the only one involved. Argus confirmed that malicious people were filling the the capital with shadows and that he needed to find their hideout and expose everything as quickly as possible. Jin asked if the most suspicious place was the Harnisk Academy, and Argus replied that it was. Then he opened the door and introduced someone who would be his guide inside the academy, his sister Milia Olton. Milia asked her brother if she really had to help an inferior species disguise himself. Argus told her to behave. She snapped back, saying that the very existence of an inferior species was already an insult, that the girl beside him might even be powerful, but that did not make it acceptable to give a position to someone like that. Jin simply commented that that little lady had a sharp tongue. Argus apologized for her behavior. Karina, who was also present, whispered to Jin that Milia was exceptionally talented, full of connections and power, but extremely arrogant and clearly prejudiced. Jin understood the message. Milia asked if he truly understood the situation, because it was not enough to just disguise himself. He needed to act like a real academy instructor and be as good as one. She made it clear that she did not believe he was capable of that, and even questioned whether he had any aptitude for teaching. Hakama ended up blurting out that he did not even know how to read, which irritated Jin, who said she did not need to say that like that. Milia stated that it was completely out of the question for him to take part in that mission, and that at the very least she would not accompany him. Hakama tried to ease the situation by saying that there were other things he could do. After all, he was very strong. Milia then looked at him for a moment and said that if he was truly strong, he could at least deal with the academy students. Even so, she reinforced that an instructor needed to be much more than just brute strength. When she left, Argus simply sighed, and soon after Karina commented that the ones who had attacked Jin earlier had been her doing. Argus apologized for what had happened and said he would talk to her later, but Jin replied that he did not mind. Even so, he asked what exactly he was planning with that instructor disguise. Argus explained that he wanted to place him in that position because he possessed very powerful spiritual arts, and that to maintain the disguise, it would be enough to teach the students the basics, such as fire ignition, electrical discharge, freezing and healing, which were considered the 4 fundamental spiritual arts. Jin asked if that was all, and Argus found the reaction strange, questioning whether he could perhaps use all types of spiritual arts, since only a very small fraction of people were capable of that. Jin then thought that the leader of the slaver bandits he had faced earlier was seen as someone exceptional, and that started to seem interesting to him, as he already felt ready to show his own power. It seemed that the common sense of that era was quite different from what he had imagined. A week passed, and finally the day of the entrance exam at Harnisk Academy arrived. Hakama took the exam because she wanted to enter the academy. One of the staff members received Argus with respect, saying it was an honor to see him there, especially since the 7th unit of the Sacred Knights should be very busy. Argus replied that they were simply carrying out their shift. Jin asked what that meant, and Argus explained that once a year they took turns nominating a member to the academy who would become a special instructor, and that year the responsibility had fallen on the 7th unit, so he had used that right to nominate him. The staff member was unsure if he was really the right person, especially being of an inferior species, but still led the group to the director, who was already waiting for them. Argus greeted her with respect, saying it had been a long time since they last met. She replied that she had not seen him since graduation, and commented that in such a short time, he had become a very honorable knight. She thanked him for his cooperation over time, but also said she had heard many rumors about him, not only involving spiritual arts, but also disputes between internal factions. Even knowing that he was a busy man, she stated that he should show more respect for the academy. She then pointed out that he was presenting an instructor of an inferior species, and asked if he truly believed he could serve that place. Jin, already tired of hearing that, remained silent. Argus replied that he was perfectly capable, even more than any member of the 7th unit when it came to combat skills. The director said that if he claimed that, she wanted to hear the opinion of the others. One of the staff members spoke out completely against it, saying it was absurd, and that such an instructor would stain the sacred history of the academy, since there had never been someone of an inferior species in that position, and that it was not a role for someone of his kind. The director mentioned that Lord Gita had already spoken and asked Rudman what he thought. He replied that he also agreed with the opposition, explaining that many students came from noble families, and that it would be bad for the academy's reputation if parents saw a teacher of an inferior species there. The director admitted that she was inclined not to allow it, but said she wanted to hear Jin's side. He formally introduced himself as Shido Jin, from Kodama village, and apologized for the late introduction. The director was surprised to notice how calm he remained, even after so many insults. Jin stated that he fully understood their concerns, but asked them to clarify one thing. He asked whether he did not fit the position simply because he was of an inferior species, or if they truly believed he did not have enough skill. The director replied that if he had the skill, the rest would not matter, and questioned whether he could prove it. Argus then suggested that they test him. Later, already at the spiritual arts training arena, Get, known for his prominent nose, commented that since the entrance exam was happening that day, there were not many students around, and at least he would not be humiliated in front of a large audience. Jin did not even bother responding to the provocations. The director explained that the rules were simple. They would fight using only spiritual arts. Even with few students present, because of the entrance exam, those who were there became curious about the fight that was about to happen. Milia watched everything in silence. Jin, on the other hand, thought it was a huge waste of time. The director, however, seemed genuinely excited to see what he was capable of. Argus reflected that it would be the first time he would see Jin fighting up close. People of inferior species generally had lower physical capabilities and could not reach the peak of divine power. He hoped his judgment about him was correct. act. Jeet announced the start of the fight and made the first move, launching a fireball. Jin dodged it easily. Jeet, noticing that students were watching, was pleased with the audience, and then fired electric arrows. But once again, Jin avoided everything. Jeet began to think that he only knew how to dodge, something fitting for an inferior species. Even though he was not a sacred knight, he had confidence in his own abilities, and continued alternating between fire and electricity attacks. Jin thought that he did not want to use the power of nanomachines against people, but he saw no other choice. He decided to show only a fraction of his power, and with a simple raise of his hand, created a gravitational field that slammed Geet into the ground with force. No one understood what had happened. They had never seen a spiritual art like that before. Get tried to stand up but could not. Jin calmly explained that he had only manipulated the gravity around him a little, and asked if that art was not familiar. He added that perhaps he had a lot to teach at that academy, not only to the students but also to the staff. After a few moments, he released the technique and freed Get, who was still dazed on the ground. Gyu asked what that had been, and Jin simply replied that it was spiritual arts. Gyu said he had never heard of anything like that, and suggested it must be some cheap trick. The director said she had seen enough, and Argus agreed. Milia was in shock, recognizing that it was an extremely high level of spiritual art, but wondering how it was possible. Unlike them, the higher races were protected by spirits. A human of an inferior species should not have such deep power. She began to wonder what he really was. A week later, the director was in the auditorium giving the opening speech. She said that the academy offered academic education, but its true purpose was to train warriors capable of facing the evils of the world. Those who could not keep up would be expelled without mercy. However, for those who managed to graduate, joining the Sacred Knights would not be just a dream. Everything in that world was achieved through merit and effort. Meanwhile, Milia was among the veterans, most of them from noble backgrounds. Linus, who had a lion-like appearance, commented that it was rare to see her at the entrance ceremony and asked what had happened. She replied that he also almost never showed up. Linus said that if there were any noble newcomer of great value, it was important to make connections early. Then he noticed something and asked why there was a man of an inferior species sitting among the teachers. Milia replied that it was simple. He was a teacher. She asked what his view was of that man. Milius answered that he only saw someone of an inferior species. Milia commented that he was probably right. Meanwhile, Jin was concerned about the investigation he needed to carry out. The academy was enormous, and he drew attention wherever he went. Since he arrived, he could feel the eyes on him. The first part of the job would be the hardest, changing the perception people had about humans considered inferior. He was the most suspicious person there, so to begin any investigation, he would need to earn recognition first. Later, Geet was in the classroom where Jin would teach and announced that it was the beginning of spiritual arts classes. He told the newcomers to stay focused, as they were in a class considered elite. At least that was what people usually said. He asked why there were so few students there, and whether they were unmotivated. Milia thought the reason was obvious. Geet commented that no one seemed interested in having spiritual arts classes with someone of an inferior species, and decided that he would spread even more remarks to humiliate the teacher. He then gave the floor for the new instructor to introduce himself. Shido Jin introduced himself as the current instructor of spiritual arts fundamentals, and said it was a pleasure to meet them. Lizardus questioned whether he was really qualified for that position. Jin replied that it was not up to the students to judge that. Anyone who did not want to attend the class could leave, but those who chose to stay would have to follow a fundamental rule: never use power against people. He explained that spiritual arts, since their creation, were developed to neutralize the extraordinary power of corrupted creatures. The suppression effect did not activate in human bodies, which meant they should never be used against other people. That power existed exclusively to destroy monsters. He reinforced to the class that spiritual arts should not be used in the wrong way. One of the nobles raised his voice and asked if he was an idiot, saying that power was just power. He added that he was curious to see what someone of an inferior species could teach, but that hearing that about not using spiritual arts was ridiculous. He even suggested that perhaps the teacher was afraid that the students might be stronger than him. Jin calmly replied that if he truly believed he had no power, he could come forward and prove it. He told him to use the strongest attack he had, and guaranteed that he would come out unharmed, without even dirtying his clothes. If he were injured, he promised he would never appear at the academy again. He asked what he thought of that bet. The noble climbed onto the desk, calling him a little man of an inferior species, and began preparing a massive lightning strike that vibrated throughout the room. He fired it at Jin, causing an explosion that left smoke and burn marks in the surroundings. In the next instant, a knife passed right beside the noble's head. Jin commented that if he wanted to, he could have finished him right there. He explained that judging someone by appearance or prejudice was a fatal mistake. Lias, confused, asked what kind of shield that was, and whether it was really a spiritual art. Jin questioned whether he considered himself inferior just because of the species he belonged to, and stated that he was far stronger than him, reminding him that he should be called professor there. Taking advantage of the silence, Jin asked the class a question, wanting to know if they understood the activation conditions of spiritual arts, and told the student who attacked him to answer. The noble said it was simple: just concentrate divine power and imagine what you want to release. Jin confirmed that imagination was important, but explained that it was not what activated spiritual arts. He said they manifested when they were accepted into the body and allowed to flow through the soul, creating different wavelengths within the organism. He explained that there were 8 basic wavelengths that formed fire, lightning, healing, and ice, which were the most well known. Above them, there were also gravity control control, light, air, and spatial shields, precisely the arts he had used earlier. Those were the 8 foundations of spiritual arts. Ji was shocked to realize that he was saying he could use all 8 types. Jin then explained that to turn lightning into a spear, like the student had done, that was where imagination came in. With that, he declared that they could now begin the class for real. Later, walking through the corridors, he remained focused on the investigation. The academy was enormous, full of students coming and going, and many eyes still followed him. He knew he could seem increasingly suspicious, so he needed to find places where students did not usually go. That was when he crossed paths with Milia, who asked what exactly he was. Jin replied that he was just a man of an inferior species, just as she had said before. She admitted that she might have been too quick to judge, because he clearly was not normal. Even so, she stated that it was impossible for someone of an inferior species to use all spiritual arts. He replied that as he had explained in class, anyone could use all spiritual arts, they just needed to learn how to change the wavelength. Milia commented that even with the explanation, it did not seem easy at all. If everyone could do what he did, he would not be drawing so much attention. In the end, she suggested they go somewhere more discreet to continue that conversation. On the way, Milia asked if he was going to answer the question she had asked earlier. Jin replied that he was just a man from an ancient era who had slept in Kodama village for 100 million years. She laughed, saying he was quite the comedian, and asked what exactly he had done 100 million years ago. He answered that he had done many things, but that he was an agent, someone who worked until his bones broke for the government, fighting villains, monsters, and all kinds of threats. Even after so much time, to him it felt like yesterday, and that brought a strange sense of nostalgia. She then asked how he ended up sleeping for so long. Jin replied that he failed, that he had been arrogant, and thought he could fix the world alone. Because of that, he could not save anything, and everyone lost everything. He understood too late that he needed allies, and that no one can solve a global crisis alone. Milia wondered how much of that was true, but decided not to press further at that moment. She explained that she was just fulfilling her part of the agreement as a guide, something she had promised her brother. She led Jin to an abandoned room, full of mold, looking like a storage space for old and broken things. Inside, he began to notice some strange details. Milia commented that he must be looking for that place, since the academy map listed an empty room in that area, but no one had ever been able to find it, which was quite suspicious. Jin agreed, and started looking for something out of place. That was when he noticed a single object that seemed displaced in the old library, a small owl statue that had no dust at all. Unlike everything else, he turned the owl's head and suddenly a secret passage opened. Milia was surprised, and asked how he had noticed that. Jin replied that it was kind of obvious, since everything there was covered in dust except that piece, and the rest was pure intuition. He said he would go first, and told her to wait, since he did not know what might be down there, and it could be dangerous. Milia pushed back, saying she would go too, and told him not to underestimate her, reminding him that she was one of the best students, and just as capable as her brother. He ended up agreeing that he could trust her at least a little. The two of them began descending a staircase that seemed to lead far deeper than just the basement of an academy. The surroundings turned into a kind of dark, silent, and unsettling cave. Jin commented that it looked like the kind of place where fantasy monsters would be born. As they walked, Milia took the chance to ask more about his past, wanting to know who exactly he used to fight, and whether he had already found anyone suspicious at the academy. He commented that he was getting too many questions that day, but admitted that yes, there was someone who made him suspicious. The name was Rudman. According to him, Rudman was extremely calm when speaking with people, but when he was alone, he seemed different, as if his consciousness was not there, as if he were somewhere else. It gave the impression that he was being forced to occupy that position at the academy, while his true purpose was somewhere else. On top of that, he had a very high guard and was the first to suspect Jin when he entered the institution. Milia commented that she found Geet much more suspicious than Rudman, but Jin disagreed, saying that Geet would never be able to maintain a disguise for long, since he showed his emotions far too easily and was probably just someone unstable. In any case, at the end of the stairs, they arrived at a space that looked like a huge empty warehouse, silent and even more mysterious than the entire path they had taken to get there. Milia did not expect to find such a gigantic space hidden beneath the academy, but the one who was truly shocked was Jin. At the far end of that enormous warehouse, he recognized something that changed his expression immediately. It was the door to one of Kagura's laboratories. He was absolutely certain that structure was made with nanomachines. Milia asked what could possibly exist behind those doors, and why something like that would be hidden down there. Jin explained that normally an access key would be required. Back in Kodama village, Hakama had needed a key to open a similar structure. That meant that probably all doors of that type required authentication. Or maybe not. He decided to test it. He used the power he had gained after the nanomachine injection and focused on the door. To his surprise, it opened easily. That could only mean one thing. The doors had already been unlocked. Jin concluded that the person trying to throw the country into chaos had access to that laboratory's keys. When they entered, the scene was even worse than they had imagined. The place was full of corrupted creatures trapped in cages, including one of gigantic size. Milia was in shock, asking how something like that could be hidden beneath the academy without anyone knowing. She also wanted to know how he had managed to open the door. Jin replied vaguely, saying that he was just a very special ancient human. Deep down, she began to wonder whether that story about 100 million years might actually have some truth to it. Jin began observing the creatures carefully, and noticed something strange. They were not going berserk. They were not fighting against the cages, nor did they show anger or stress about being imprisoned. That was abnormal. Then he remembered the creature the leader of the slaver bandits had released against him. It had also been completely calm inside its cage, and seemed to obey that man's commands. Something was wrong. He also wondered how they had managed to transport such an enormous creature into that place. Milia said her brother had been right to suspect the academy. Maybe if they arranged an ambush there in the laboratory, the true person responsible for all of that would appear. Jin disagreed. To him, the most sensible move would be to seal the academy immediately and eliminate all the corrupted creatures. She argued that by doing that, the person behind the plan would escape. Jin said he understood her point but raised another concern. What if those creatures broke free and attacked the students? It was not worth sacrificing innocents just to capture the mastermind behind the scheme. Besides, he had a bad feeling. His instincts told him that something even bigger was about to happen. He decided to investigate the laboratory further and ordered Milia to go back and warn Argus immediately. While she was going up, Jin began walking through the laboratory corridors, analyzing every detail and looking for any solid clue. Meanwhile, up above, Geet was being mocked in the corridors. Some students were commenting that he had been defeated by the inferior species professor. He was furious. He thought that because of that bastard, his reputation was ruined. To him, someone using 8 different kinds of spiritual arts could only be cheating. He was determined to expose Jin. The director appeared and told him to stop that strange behavior. She said she would not judge him for his hobbies, but asked if he had seen Lord Rudman around. Jet replied that he had not seen him since the entrance ceremony. The director explained that she needed to consult him about a matter, especially related to the new students. That was when she noticed something strange in the sky. Dark clouds were beginning to form above the academy. They were not rain clouds. They were clouds filled with corruption. Milia rushed up the stairs, and the one she found at the top was none other than Lord Rudman. Meanwhile, Jin was already inside the laboratory, analyzing a kind of core that pulsed as if it were alive. He did not know if it had been created by Kagura, but as he investigated further, he ended up finding another one of those cases. Inside, there was a cube with a message and a nanomachine injection, and he truly hoped there would be some clue there about the situation he was facing. In the recording, Kagura asked if he could hear him, and said that it seemed he had finally made it there, which made sense, since that was the laboratory closest to the first one where he had awakened. In fact, that was the place where Kagura had been developing an incredible device, and part of the functions of that new tool had been sealed together with the nanomachines inside the injection. He considered himself a genius, because by applying that injection, only Jin would be able to use the device, and what he was creating was a teleportation device. Hearing that, Jin was surprised and began connecting the dots. Maybe that was how that enormous creature and that core had ended up there. Time kept moving, and he thought that a teleportation device was a technology that could never have been released 100 million years ago, since it connected space to space as if they were portals. If that were true, it would explain how the creatures had appeared in the middle of the city, right in the capital, and also how huge monsters and that core had reached the underground of the academy. In the recording, everything suddenly changed. The core shone intensely, and right after that, all the corrupted creatures began to be teleported. Argus and the 7th Division were already prepared for the worst possible scenario, and it truly happened. A rain of monsters began to fall over the capital. Meanwhile, at the top of the academy, Rudman questioned what Milia was doing there and said she had interfered where she was not invited for far too long, but now it was already too late. That was the day of the execution. Originally, it had been scheduled for later, but they had to move their plans forward because she and that little man had been investigating too much. By instinct alone, he already knew that he would be a problem for his plans, especially after they found the secret passage. Milia had no intention of backing down, and Rudman confidently stated that he would be able to defeat her, since he had obtained incredible power. What he did not realize was that Hakama was behind him along with her friend, ready to act. While he was giving his confident speech, he was suddenly struck in the head when Hakama threw a vase and knocked him down on the spot. After that, Milia asked why they were there. Hakama explained that she was looking for Jin because something terrible had happened outside, and they needed his help. She also said that it was her friend Kudo who told her that he had come to that place. Milia asked if she was a new student, and Kudo confirmed that she was, stating her full name, and even asking if the professor would be alright after the hit. Even though she recognized that she had just struck a professor in the head, she felt that in that situation it was justified, and even commented that since no one had seen her face, they could blame the rich girl if necessary. At that moment, Jin came running up the stairs. Hakama told him that something terrible was happening outside, but he replied that he already knew. All the corruption creatures that had been in the laboratory had simply disappeared. Milia already understood what that meant, even though it was terrifying. When they all looked from the top of the academy, they saw the capital being devastated. There were monsters everywhere, attacking people, destroying houses, and spreading chaos throughout the city. The largest of all the monsters, the one that had been trapped in the giant cage, began to massacre everything in its path. Jin realized that a small error in his judgment had caused that entire tragedy, and became furious with himself. While he tried to understand the situation, Hakama drew his attention, telling him to look more carefully, because the creature was preparing something. The gigantic monster truly began to gather energy to launch an attack directly at the royal castle. At that moment, Jin remembered what he had received from the doctor. Kagura had explained that with the nanomachine injection, he could use a simplified version of the teleportation device. With the energy stored in the nanomachines, he could activate that ability once per day. The device had been made for short distances, but it could be pushed a little beyond its limits. Without hesitation, Jin teleported exactly in front of the creature's attack and activated his nano-machine barrier, absorbing the entire impact. Meanwhile, the guild members were falling into despair. Hardin Gonslot, the guild master of the capital, declared that there was nothing more they could do. He had mobilized everyone who could fight or rescue civilians, and now it was up to the Holy Knights to eliminate the monsters. The problem was that half of them were outside the capital, on official missions. To him, that attack had been planned at the exact moment of greatest vulnerability. If the Grand Captain had been present, things might have been different, but at that moment it seemed like the end, and he lowered his gaze, believing the castle was lost. Then a messenger asked him to look again. When he raised his eyes, he saw Jin protecting the castle with his nano-machine barrier. The girl immediately recognized him, saying he was the same man she had seen in Kodama village. After enduring the creature's attack, Jin counterattacked with a beam of energy that struck the giant, but only its shoulder was damaged, and the monster began to slowly regenerate. He realized he would need much more power to finish that creature in one blow. The teleport had consumed far more energy than he expected, so he materialized a sword with nano-machines and decided that he would finally fight using his own body. He launched a blade of wind that cut off the creature's other arm and moved forward to close the distance. He knew that that level of damage would be easily regenerated, but he was using the attacks as a distraction. Now he needed to focus on the basics of applying nano-machines in combat. He canceled the weight of his own body using gravitational control and increased the air pressure around him using wind control. Meanwhile, the guild members were struggling to contain the smaller monsters, but even the most troublesome academy students showed up to help. Everyone had to fight in that situation. Surrounded by creatures, they saw Jin emerge, cutting across the battlefield, eliminating monsters along the way as he advanced straight toward the main enemy. Some students wondered if he was the same man they had seen before. Jin knew he needed to get even closer to deal real damage, but he had to interrupt his advance to dodge new attacks from the giant. Wherever he passed, he cut down creatures with his blade, and his movements became faster and faster. He kept accelerating as he closed the distance, single-handedly distracting the creature, capable of destroying the entire capital. He delivered several strikes across the monster's body, all superficial since its regeneration was still active, but then he focused all his strength into one final thrust, like a spear, aiming directly at its head. The resulting explosion finally defeated the creature. The guildmaster was astonished and wondered who that man was and what kind of absurd power he possessed. 3 days later, the capital was already in the process of reconstruction. Upon waking up in his room at the inn, Jin reflected that it had been a major incident, but the damage had not been as catastrophic as it could have been. The Order of the Holy Knights had fought bravely, holding back the smaller creatures and protecting the civilians. After the incident, the academy was closed for investigation. Rudman, identified as the main culprit, was arrested. Some other instructors were also taken in for questioning, under suspicion of involvement. The academy would remain closed for quite some time, even though Jin had worked there for only 1 day. Even so, because of that entire incident, he realized that he now had a new challenge ahead. Even after everything, Jin knew he could still easily handle the type of enemy that had appeared in the capital. The problem was when many of them gathered at the same time, he was not fast enough to eliminate all of them at once, while also saving people. If he wanted to protect everyone, he needed to become even stronger, and he already knew what he needed to do for that. But before he could pick up Kagura's cube again, someone knocked on the door. It was Milia, wearing a long and beautiful dress, saying she had come to get him. Professor, Jin commented that the academy should be closed, but she explained that her brother was calling for him. He wanted to thank him for everything he had done, and also talk about other matters. When he asked if she had personally come just to call him, Milia answered yes, because to invite someone as important as him, it had to be someone important as well. She was there as a representative of the Ulton family. He asked if she would finally stop calling him an inferior species, and she said she would think about it. She commented that people should not be judged by appearance, and that respect should be maintained regardless of the situation. From now on, she also wanted to receive his teachings. Hakama noticed the sudden change in attitude and found it curious. Milia also commented that she was there because the dormitory was boring. Then Hakama complained about the way she had entered, acting somewhat prejudiced, and Jin took the opportunity to question whether she had really reflected on that kind of behavior. Later at Zoltan's residence, the two siblings who had been hired thanks to Jin welcomed him and guided him inside. He commented that the two seemed to be adapting well and asked if they had been alright during the incident. They answered yes, saying that the people at the residence were quite strong. The head butler and the head maid were impressive, and that made Jin satisfied to see that they were being well taken care of. The siblings also said they had heard that he had done incredible things. When he asked who had spread that, it became clear that it had been Milia, who believed that great achievements should naturally be shared, especially by a disciple like her. She even told the two that since they were similar to Jin, they should learn more from him. One of the younger ones also said that recently Lady Milia had become much more polite with them. Jin thought that her change in attitude had been just as fast as Sarlas's. After that, he went to Argus's reception room. When he knocked on the door, he realized that Argus was not alone. Sitting beside him was the leader of the capital's guild, Hardin Ganslot. Argus apologized for calling him so suddenly, but Jin said he was bored anyway, so it was not a problem. First, Argus introduced his friend. Hardin formally introduced himself and said it was a pleasure to meet him, since he had personally witnessed his actions during the great incident. If he had not stopped that creature, the consequences would have been disastrous. He sincerely thanked him for saving the country country. Jin replied simply that he had only defeated the largest monster, since most of the others had been contained by the Holy Knights and the guild. Hardin noticed that he was humble and friendly, perhaps without apparent ambitions or with ambitions far beyond what they could imagine. Then he informed him that because of the incident, the royal family wished to meet him. Before that, however, he wanted to clarify an important matter. He directly asked who he was. Thanks to the guild members spread across the cities, they had been able to track his movements and investigate him, but they found no information about his past. Argus also made this clear, asking where he came from and why he had come to that country. At that moment, Jin's only option was to answer. He said he was not exactly hiding anything. He just thought that even if he told the full truth, they would not believe him. That was why he had remained silent. Argus then stated that no matter what he said, he would believe him. Jin decided to tell the truth and said that he was a human from 100 million years ago. After hearing the entire story, Argus remembered the legend of Kodama village, the one about a divine guardian sleeping behind great sealed doors. Hardin commented that it was hard to believe something like that, but Milia was the first to say that she believed him. She herself had seen Jin open the secret doors beneath the academy, something no one else had been able to do. In addition, both she and her brother had witnessed the absurd potential of power he possessed. Argus then asked what had happened to his sister, and Jin explained that he had remained asleep in that same country for all that time. The reason he had come to the capital was simple. He needed to gather information about the current era, since he was outdated by 100 million years. Hardin asked what kind of information he was looking for. Jin answered that he wanted to better understand the corrupted beings of that era, because they had already existed 100 million years ago. However, by that logic, they should not exist anymore, since they should have been extinct long ago. When asked why, he explained about the power of spirits. In that ancient time, those spirits had been spread throughout the entire world. That energy was the mortal weakness of corrupted beings. It was a substance created specifically to contain those creatures and restore the environments they destroyed. Then came the obvious question. If that was true, why did the corrupted still exist in the current era? Jin said he did not know the details, and that was exactly why he was investigating. According to information he had received from a friend, those creatures were evolving. Hardin looked at the artifact in Jin's hands and asked if it came from that ancient civilization. To him, it seemed like an overly complex system. From the way people of that era dealt with monsters, it was clear that they had some knowledge about the subject. That was exactly why Jin had come to the capital, to study more and search for answers. Argus then asked what the other piece of information was that he wanted to uncover. Jin explained that he was searching for laboratories like the one that existed beneath the academy. He believed there were others scattered across the world, and he had a very clear goal: to erase all corrupted beings from the face of that world. That was what he lived for. The two acknowledged that it was a difficult story to believe, but Argus said he trusted him. After all, his own goal was also to eliminate the corrupted. Even so, he advised Jin not to go around telling that story to just anyone, because many would think he was crazy. Hardin agreed, saying that if Argus trusted him, then he would trust him as well. If he had been someone with ill intentions, he would not have protected the royal castle. At that moment, servants entered, saying they did not want to interrupt, but reminded Argus that he had another commitment in his schedule. He stood up and told them to prepare everything. Later, Jin had his hair neatly styled and was wearing noble clothes from the capital, because he was going to meet the king. Argus asked if he did not like the clothes, but in fact they fit perfectly, and everyone thought they suited him very well. Then Hardin explained that he would not actually be meeting the king but the prince, who was representing his majesty, as the king was bedridden. It was a matter of keeping appearances, which was why Jin needed to be dressed properly. He commented that he just hoped he would not be dragged into any more trouble. When they arrived at the palace, they were received by several guards and escorted to the throne room. Standing before them was a dazzling and imposing man, the first prince of the capital, Tails Kermosia. Jin introduced himself respectfully. The prince explained that he was there in place of his father, who was ill, to express gratitude not only on behalf of the king but of the entire kingdom. He praised the actions taken during the incident and mentioned that he had heard Jin came from Kodama village. He found it surprising that such extraordinary talent had come from such a small village. Then he got straight to the point and made a clear offer. He wanted Jin to serve the kingdom as a holy knight and to take his side.